Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and today we are going to be discussing this book, AnarchoMonarchism, a collection of essays from Insula Qui. Um, would like to first start off this video by explaining um, basically my political background and history. First off, um, just by the way my outfit is with the Hawaiian shirt and the camo pants, I'm sure you can start drawing your own conclusions on where I fall. I was always, since I was like 18, um, libertarian and cap, less government, more markets. That's where I always was. As an ANCAP, I couldn't really. It was getting hard to fight the allegations of neo-feudalism and the criticisms such as people say ANCAPs want a government, they just want it privatized, and it's really hard to fight that. So I really wanted to start looking into different political ideologies. Um, just to see if there were any, because a lot of people like the free market and whatnot, despite its criticisms. I knew I wanted to branch out and look into different systems, especially economic systems. Um, I knew about communism, socialism, capitalism, but I wanted to know more about corporatism, state controlled enterprise, and stuff like that. It was in my mind, and then it really took off when Stone Toss got doxxed, and everybody said that he was a Nazi and a fascist and a this and a that, and I thought a lot of his stances were common sense for the most part. A lot of things obviously stood out more than others, but so and the fact that it's impossible to find any information on fascism only made me more curious about it. So good job with that. Uh, so yeah, I got into um, I read Anarcho-Fascism by Jonas Nielsen, and yeah, so I got this book, Anarcho-Monarchism. I got the plush ball for it. I also have the plush ball for Anarcho-Fascism, um, Matriarchal Monarchism. Let me get that into view. Homo Libertarianism and Islamic Anarchism. I don't know what I'm doing while I'm talking about this stuff, but anyway. So yeah, I think I'm gonna read you a few excerpts from the book, summarize it, and yeah. So I just want to start off with the disclaimer, which I thought was very interesting. In the back pages, it says Anarcho-Monarchism by Insula Qui, copyright 2018, Insula Qui, no rights reserved. I'll get that. Um, the author of this book hereby waives all claim of copyright, economic and moral, in this work and immediately places it in the public domain. It may be used, distorted, or destroyed in any manner whatsoever without further attribution or notice to the creator. I'm going to just try to get that. This is not going to focus, is it? No, I guess not. That's what it says, though. Um, yup. Yeah, so here's the table of contents, the chapters. There's 30 of them. I'm going to read them right now. Um, Chapter 0, what is anarcho-monarchism? Chapter 1, the contradiction of freedom. Chapter 2, the final arbiter. No, just final arbiter, sorry. Chapter 3, the centralization of defense. Chapter 4 is pro-war, anti-nation. Chapter 5, the necessity of force. Chapter 6, brutal freedom. Chapter 7, all men are created equal. Chapter 8, social Darwinism. Chapter 9, the rule of law. Chapter 10, against taxes. Chapter 11, high trust. Chapter 12, liberty, property, society. Chapter 13, the family and capitalism. Chapter 14, the case for tradition. Chapter 15, community, tradition, liberty. Chapter 16, the two laws of nature. Chapter 17, National Socialism and Libertarianism. Chapter 18, Authoritarianism versus Libertarianism. Chapter 19, Strong and Small. Chapter 20, Libertarianism and Fascism. Chapter 21, Producerism. Chapter 22, Communitarian Libertarianism. Chapter 23, The Final Solution to the Banking Question. Chapter 24, Familialism. No. Chapter 24, Familism. Chapter 25, Neo-Feudalism. Chapter 26, The Case for Guilds. Chapter 27, Greatness. Chapter 28, Kings by Merit. Chapter 29, Anarcho-Monarchy. No, For an Anarchist Monarchy. And Chapter 30, On Libertarianism and Statecraft. So, yeah, just from the chapters, we can tell it's a lot about natural order, um, so not even although there is social Darwinism in it. I would say anthropology, um, psychology. It's really a look at humanity throughout history, uh, a lot into human nature. This book, more than anything, I would say it deals with authority, liberty, and how they are connected, disconnected, relevant, the same, different. It gives a very nuanced approach at both of those topics and the topic of them together, combining them. Anarcho-monarchism obviously seems contradictory, but really almost every political idea is. Everybody wants rule for thee and not for me, realistically. Um, so we just, how do we mitigate that is basically the question in that this book and most political polemics, try to answer. Um, so I wrote a few pages that I thought were interesting to share with. Um, yeah, I'm gonna go with chapter 15, community, tradition, liberty, on page 110. Actually, no. I'm gonna go first with the case for tradition on page 101. I'm going to just start with the first chapter on the first page. It says libertarians often shy away from tradition in order to retreat into libertine hedonism. This is the sort of mindset the modern left thrives in and is the most comfortable with. These fundamentally leftist moral foundations lead the libertarians to ignore what benefits tradition could potentially bring. Here I will present why we need tradition from a strictly libertarian context. This is not meant to be a comprehensive analysis of tradition, as I am not even nearly qualified to undertake an endeavor like that. So, next paragraph. The first important part of tradition is how tradition is the only sustainable way of creating functional familial structures. Healthy families are necessary for a free society to prosper. Making the assumption that a free and prosperous society is possible while there are no familial structures to embed people with virtue and ensure the stability and emotional maturity of all people within a libertarian society is misguided. All right, I find that very not um, controversial. Um, yeah. I was young. I thought tradition was just old people's baggage. It's pointless. There's it's just a stupid, archaic. But I think Jordan Peterson points out that tradition is just what survives selective pressures, and that just makes perfect sense. Uh, there wouldn't really be a lot of people around left if we all just decided to kill our third child. You know, so that's one thing that we could definitely not make a tradition out of. Um, at least it wouldn't last long. So there are things that are sustainable and non-sustainable, and there's tradition is what has sustained. So you can be as progressive as you want, as progressive as I was ideologically, openness and experimenting with new things. Um, but you still have to rely on what came before, just to build off of or just to work with. There's always going to be things that came before whatever you're doing, pretty much. Let me see another page. Chapter 15, Community, Tradition, and Liberty. I don't know why I wrote this down. I don't even. I don't remember what it says. Oh, I'm definitely going to read the chapter, the final solution to the banking question. Um, Let me read this part. Okay, yeah. So, page 110, the bottom paragraph. First, since people live under rules born out of a general social consensus of acceptability, like I was just talking about with the tradition and whatnot, they will not relate to each other as independent entities. People will rather interact as social and interdependent entities. Yeah, anarcho-capitalism, individualist libertarianism, um, absolutely has a tendency to, although the emphasis on individual liberty is paramount, it kind of atomizes people, um, and neglects, you know, just community, family, social interminglingness, all things that have been proven that we need, just for our brains to function normally. So a lot of ANCAPs, libertarians, individualists, um, they think in terms of the hermit, of the lone wolf, and that might be the appropriate way to approach problems and liberty and justice. We don't deliver justice on groups, we deliver justice to individuals. Um, we need friends. We need friends, and I think that's very under. I'm so sorry about my mustache, dude. I really. That's better. We need friends. We need friends. We need family. We need community. We kind of go schizophrenic without that. We go schizophrenic living atomized even in cities. There's no difference between being isolated by yourself in a room and being isolated where there's 100 people looking at you and not talking to you. There's really no difference. Since people in the same community have similar patterns of behavior, they can form stronger and higher quality social bonds with more ease. They are not subject to social individualism. This makes it easier for people to get better and more fulfilling social experiences and bond with people more intensely and intimately. Absolutely. I live in Sullivan County. Um, Huge Hasidic population. And because they enforce social cohesion, friends, family, community, all that, um, they seem to be doing a lot better in terms of mental health, for sure. They really don't seem to have the existentialist dread most of us um, individualized Americans have. All of us in the Western world are basically going through. Um, yeah, let's get into. Oh, I totally forgot. One of the main things I wanted to read. One of the first things. Yeah, this book. Like I said, it's mostly about dealing with liberty and authority. It doesn't. It goes into um, the policy theory for anarcho-monarchism, but it's not the whole thing. It's not a whole manifesto just about contract agreements, natural law, accumulation of capital under a particular system. It's it's more than that. It doesn't go into just that. I can't believe I forgot to talk about that. Like he goes into society, the history of monarchies, the history of anarchist societies. It's There's only a few chapters that actually mention the inner machinations of our friend right here. And he says that. I don't know why I didn't start with the introduction. I'm sorry. It says the interplay between authoritarian and libertarian philosophies is one of the most fascinating things. Most people imagine this to be a set of contradictory philosophies that are in total opposition to one another. However, the way in which these views interact demonstrates that this is not the case. It is easy to say that in social organization, a meaningful distinction is the degree of authority, but I don't see that being the case at all. The degree of authority is scarcely relevant to the philosophical underpinnings of different schools of thought. Some may say that they want liberty for the sake of liberty, but then get stuck arguing over what it means to have liberty. This should not be the way in which we approach any political subject, as it inherently causes problems. No person thinks that the more authority there is, the more inherently better a society becomes. The same with liberty. People have their own moral values, and as such, their values render the questions of liberty and authority mostly meaningless. I disagree. I mean, there are definitely people who think freedom no matter what, and some people think control no matter what, and they both are the ends and the means. What's up, Thomas? I'm just doing a book review. AnarchoMonarchism. Should I pause? I guess I'm. Oh, I can pause. Sorry about that, guys. First episode, still getting used to this. I think I just unplugged my microphone. Alright, that should be good. So yeah, I still see what he's saying, despite that. Um, the point of this work is to demonstrate a conception of liberty and authority that completely subverts the expectation that is set when liberty and authority are discussed. And finally, I aim to introduce the possibility of a synthesis of libertarianism and authoritarianism, which can produce a philosophy that seems contradictory with the established premises, but With this sort of breakdown, the philosophy can seem to make more sense than previously expected. For further information on the subject of an anarchist, you can read the anti-statist case for monarchical government, which is available on both my website, insulaQui.com, and in my previous collection of essays, Libertarian Reaction. I decided to forego including that essay here as I had already published it in the other collection, and also because the tone of that essay was not suited for the thematic exploration of this work. So yeah, I really should have started off with this. I've never seen a book admit to being clickbait. It says in the usual apology on page 10, I owe an apology to any reader who has an expectation of a professionally edited book. I do not have the status nor the wealth to have access to an editor, and thus I am relegated to self-edited and self-published books. I have tried my best, as I always do, and I have created the best product that I am able to. Furthermore, there are a few seemingly contradictory ideas, as the essays are different explorations of different thoughts. For example, I often appeal to individualism, while the collection includes an essay that makes a case for redefining individualism. But this does not mean that the contents of the essays are in disharmony or in disagreement. Rather, it is... Wait, this isn't the part where he says it's a thumbnail. Okay, this is the part where the book says it's clickbait. One of the biggest reasons why you are probably reading this book is the seeming absurdity of anarcho-monarchism. Unless this idea was at the forefront of this book, it would be likely that the book itself would be far less intriguing. Because anarcho-monarchism drives interest, I have decided to include an essay exclusively for this book detailing what anarcho-monarchism is. Usually, building a political philosophy from a set of principles is not something that I am interested in, but I do feel that I owe the reader an explanation, provided that I am going to dedicate a book to anarcho-monarchism. This essay is completely different from my usual style, as I am tackling a topic which is in itself unusual for me. The purpose of this essay is to serve as an elongated introduction to the rest of the book and should not be read in any other context. So, yeah. Like I said, there's only a few chapters dedicated specifically. They're actually even hard to find. It's time we read one of those. I would say chapter 28, Kings by Merit, 203. It's probably the best place to start. And I wanted to compare this book with Anarcho-Fascism by Jonas Nielsen, because that book is kind of the same way. It's only like the last chapter that he actually talks about the inner machinations of his political ideology and what the policies in it would be. He just spends like the first 60% of it talking about how much he hates the Swedish government and why. So page 203. That's another thing. In the table of contents are wrong. They're it says every chapter starts a page before it actually does. It says one chapter starts on page 100 and it actually starts on page 101. It says Kings by Merit, chapter 28 starts on page 203. It actually starts on page 204. Yep, that is not. I'm so sorry. It says the cameras was supposed to be HD. Yeah, let's just read it. Authority does not exist only to fulfill the goals of the authority. For authority to be justified and valid, the authority must conform to the reason why people would submit themselves under an authority in the first place. With modern libertarian theory, we have properly provided ways in which decentralized societies can guarantee order, security, and prosperity. It seems that this invalidates any need for any authority, as goals that would otherwise have been the responsibility of an authority are better accomplished if authority is left to the people themselves and not concentrated in one person. However, freedom in itself cannot solve the problem of virtue. There is no way in which libertarianism, in its purest form, can demonstrate how we can create virtue without authority. Having authority is thus inherently useful for increasing the virtue in society and nothing more than increasing virtue in society. When we can increase virtue using authority, we can create a society in which we can combine the benefits of authority and liberty. I will not be making the case for monarchy over other types of authority, but I will assume that monarchy is the optimal form of authority, and a king is the best manifestation of monarchy. These are not necessarily statements that are completely accurate, and the points I make do not hinge on these assumptions. However, they make the language I use more I make however they make the language I use much more convenient. That's a very good place to start. A lot of based philosophers, people who've actually read into political philosophy, kind of all agree that monarchy, um, in politics, there's the reason why the practice is good, and there's the reasons why the outcome is good. And we're kind of seeing that monarchy in its outcome is kind of optimal. Like there's a relationship between the king and his people, and yeah, like kings get overthrown. I think that's kind of the biggest difference between a king and a dictator. Kings get overthrown when they don't please their people. Um, so yeah, um, it's so hard to find the theory in this book. But if I were to paraphrase it, I would describe anarcho-monarchism as, so we all agree, under a voluntarist free society, under anarchy, we would all have the option to self-associate, and I guess the right wings believe in natural hierarchy, whether it be through church, school, family, anything. So under a free society, people could voluntarily sort themselves into a kingdom. And the kingdom would, yeah, basically like neo-feudalism, control the land and say what goes in it. Which, I mean, kind of seems ideal. If you're the king, it's your kingdom, and if you're a resident of the kingdom, you would still be or somebody who ascended a meritocracy would still be beholden to you. It's almost so. As an ANCAP, I think hierarchy-less society is kind of not possible, and even if it were possible, I wouldn't even be ideal. I really wouldn't even want to be. That just seems so sterile and stagnant and boring. So as libertarian, I believe in differences, that just naturally occur. And but I'm still skeptical of corporations. I see the efficiency of the free market, but I don't like the idea of corporations being the most powerful thing in a society. I don't know. I don't think that's crazy. Like, the markets are good. People should be, free to buy whatever they want, but but that always leads to extremely um huge inequalities in wealth and therefore power. I don't believe in centralized power, but with decentralized power, people still naturally fall into hierarchies, and we should like be critical of them. So yeah, this book I would rate 9 out of 10. The contents, I mean, very extremely nuanced, very very interesting. Although, like I said, it's clickbait. It's not the only thing he talks about. I mean, he could have. I mean, there's like 215 pages in here. That's my same criticism with anarcho-fascism. It's like, just condense it. Make your criticisms one thing, and make your theories and proposals a different book. There's no. I don't. Yeah, 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10. Just because there's a lot of stuff in here that you didn't really ask for, and I did say I wanted to read the chapter, A Final Solution to the Banking Question. Let me just see which chapter that is. And I think we'll be done. I think we'll just about be done. Let me find the table of contents. Oh wait, I actually found. This is a part of the video you should probably skip to. You should skip to minute 33. This is where he puts out the ideas. AnarchoMonarchism. Number 1. All violence against other people is destructive, provided that it is not preventative, as long as there is no self-defense required. As long as there is no self-defense required, violence is inherently a moral, economic, and social evil and should be avoided. To prevent violence. Number 2. To prevent violence and conflict in society, there is a need to accept property rights and a need to recognize those property rights universally. Thus, violence is not only an interpersonal issue, but an issue between various people over various properties. Violence against property is violence of a different kind. We need to recognize how theft is destructive and how property is owned justly. The only way in which we can own property justly is when that property was not appropriated by violence. This means that the ownership of property requires that it is appropriated from nature or from peaceful trade. Voluntary trade and natural resources are then the only ways in which it is appropriate to gain resources. So, clause number 4. The state ought to be abolished, as the state owns only property due to the unjust appropriation, as the property owned by the state can only be owned due to involuntary transfers of money. People are obligated to pay taxes to the state and cannot reasonably revoke their consent. Thus, the state owns no property rightfully and is an entirely negative institution. Most anarcho-capitalists stop at this point in the reasoning and never move further. It seems as if it is wholly sufficient to stop here and to think that all problems are now solved. However, I immensely disagree with that assessment and think that this reasoning needs a few more steps. That's what I was saying. Like I said, I was an ANCAP, but there was a little missing. There was more. There's got to be more than just free markets, because then it's just the state or just the corporations that take over, and who wants that? So, clause number 5. The abolition of the state cannot solve all problems that people can have in their lives. A society without coercion has no recourse to conflicts that are not predicated on coercion and problems that pertain to personal virtue. Thus, to have an effective stateless and nonviolent society, it can be useful to incorporate governance. The monarch is the natural head of such a stateless order. People have a natural tendency towards monarchy, and autocracy has historically been an effective doctrine of governance. Furthermore, democracy and decentralized autocracy cause more social conflict than a singular leader. If we accept the previous assumptions, we are left with the ideal political philosophy that combines autocratic governance with voluntarism. Thus, the king has no right to rule, but the king is accepted as providing a service to the rest of society. Volition is the only basis for the rule of the king, and merit is the only reason why the king rules. Even though in abstraction from these assumptions we can construe that it would be ideal to combine monarchy with anarchy, as defined by Rothbard, it may still seem like a vacuous ideal. Reducing a monarch to what amounts to any other business and creating a government when the state has been abolished can both seem contrary to reason. But the society of the anarchic monarchy is completely unlike the state or a business. The monarch does not demand to be followed, but ultimately most people would choose to follow a monarch of one sort or another. Just like George Washington, dude. Like, he was like, don't make me king, bro. Like, you don't want me. Like, if you're begging me to be in a position of authority, even if it's just for arbitration, be skeptical of me. Like don't, like, I should be afraid of who I'm ruling, as opposed to people who I'm ruling be afraid of me. Yeah, it's a cool idea. I'll reiterate it. The monarch does not demand to be followed, but ultimately, most people would choose to follow a monarch of one sort or another. This is because the monarchs of the world would demonstrate how effective they are at providing the services of resolving nonviolent conflicts and encouraging virtue. Thus, the world would be separated into thousands of kingdoms, with each having a monarch that can cater to the distinct needs of his subjects. The monarch would not have any inherent right to the money of his people or any territory, but rather would be bestowed dominion and wealth in accordance to how well he functions. And that's my favorite sentence. Thus, the world would be separated into thousands of kingdoms. I like to call that theory pansecessionism, also known as panarchy or pan-Balkanization. I think everyone who wants to secede should secede, bro. Like, secede. Like, don't be ruled by people who you don't want to be ruled over. I think every huge country, obviously every huge country, but not obviously, but obviously every huge country like Russia, China, aren't cohesive just because of their sheer size and variety that exists within the border. So it only makes sense for them to balkanize into the provinces, and then the provinces balkanize into until every man is a king, dude. Isn't that such a beautiful idea? Like, I'm not even necessarily an ANCAP. I would prefer to live in an ANCAP society, but just based on theory. But if you want to be a communist, if you want to live in a sterile society, if you want to live under rules or whatever, you can do that. I don't want the whole world to become one thing. I don't I want there to be variety. That's the spice of life. I want there to be queens, and I want there to be drag queens, and I want there to be little 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 Mussolinis. Because like the fascists just get it right with the camaraderie. It's just fun to be fascist. And of course, we need something to look up to, something that transcends us. I want religion, and I want degeneracy, and I want monarchy, and I want fascism, and I want anarchy. I love it. I love you, friends. Thank you so much for watching, friends. Thank you. I love you. Anarcho-monarchy and matriarchal monarchy are gonna kiss. Anarcho-fascism and matriarchal monarchy are gonna kiss. The gay is gonna kiss the fascist because they secretly want each other. It's forbidden. And the gay and the Muslim, no. I'm and yeah, queen, drag queen, gay monarchism, drag queen is the actual. Wouldn't that be so cool? LGBTQ anarcho-monarchism, where the queen is actually a drag queen. Wouldn't that be, guys? Doesn't that sound more fun? Doesn't pan balkanization sound more fun? Doesn't that sound more fun than this new world order? One more thing. I wanted to read the chapter because it's so fun. I want to read the chapter. The final solution to the banking question. On page 171. Okay, yeah, there's a lot in this book. Like, this is not for the faint of heart. It goes into like some things. Like, this guy really lets you know like how he feels about some things. Everyone that has ever I think this is like the most based part of the book. This is why this book should become a #1 bestseller. Everyone that has ever looked into how contemporary banks work knows that they don't. Quite simply put, there is currently an international cabal backed by every state due to economic necessity. This international cabal has provoked just reactions from people both on the left and on the right, but it has led to a denouncement of banking in general. Governments create debt out of nothing. they don't really owe this debt to anyone other than other governments through international banking schemes. At this point in time, almost every government is operating far above its means. It is easier to resist tax collection than the creation of debt, which has to be paid by future taxes. This means that the government's only fiscal responsibility, there's an apostrophe missing to make governments possessive. This means that the government's only fiscal responsibility is to the banking cabal and the central banks within the government. It's true that a lot of government debt is nominally owed to private individuals and companies. However, each individual and company has very limited input when it comes to the debt. Thus, these people are liabilities that can be dealt with by state policy. A large portion of the bonds and liabilities created by the government are taken care of by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, both of which ensure that states and individuals have constant debt. These banks constantly ensure that the socialist Keynesian policy can continue to be built under capitalist terms. Both of these organizations operate under pretenses that may seem virtuous. They are supposedly in the business of reducing poverty, increasing stability, and conforming to every other progressive platitude. These utopian premises are just a narrow shell to cover up the real purpose of these institutions, which is to continually enforce the status quo and to ensure the de facto poverty of all nations of the world. To do this, they accrue money from developed nations and give that money to the nations that are not suited for handling such money. Furthermore, they do so explicitly to reach leftist goals. To add to this burden, they maintain floating fiat currencies and ensure that each country continues loaning their money in a complex structure that is completely unsustainable at every level. To increase the burden more, there is the relatively new EMF, which takes on the same scheme in the scope of Europe. All of these banks and institutions serve no other purpose than to keep the nations of the world under one global control and to override whatever market decisions or local political decisions people would have made. These serve as immense agencies of destruction. Based. This book is based. This book is 100,000% based. Anarcho-monarchism is based. Monarchism, based. Anarchy, based. Banks, not based. I hate the banks. I swear to God, I hate the banks. I hate the banks, dude. I hate the banks. Dude. I really don't like the banks. I'm not a fan of the banks, dude. I don't really like the banks that much. I'm not a big fan of the banks, dude. Or the bankers. Not a fan of the banks, dude. Not a fan of the banks. Me, banks, not a fan of. Not a fan of the banks. I don't like banks. I'm not a fan of the banks. I do not like banks. I don't like banks. I don't like debt. I don't like debt slavery. I don't like banks. I don't like poverty. I don't like people being perpetually kept in poverty. I don't like parasite classes. I don't like the banks. I do not like the banks. I don't like the banks. I do not like the banks. I do not like the banks. I don't like the banks. I don't like bankers. I don't like anything that has anything to do with banks. I don't like anything. I don't like banks. 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 I don't like bankers. I don't like bankers. I'm anarcho-fascism. I don't like bankers. I really don't like bankers. I don't like bankers. I'm not a big fan of the bankers. I'm also not a big fan of the bankers, actually, now that you mention it. Economically or other. I'm monarchist, and I'm anarcho-monarchist. Anarcho-monarchist doesn't like the banks. I really don't like the banks. I really don't know enough about the banks to criticize them. I really just want to smoke weed and have gay sex.